Well, I want to welcome those of you who are in the East this morning. Great to have you with us. And if you're joining us online, welcome here this morning. Well, I don't know if you've noticed as we've worked through the book of John, but there's a lot of signs and wonders and miracles. And it would be interesting to be one of Jesus' disciples and to watch these kinds of things take place. But you wonder, what was the purpose and what was the reason of Jesus coming to bring these kinds of signs and wonders? Matthew 9 says that Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. Wouldn't that be awesome? I'd love to have him come here one day and just heal everything. That'd be great. He saw the crowds and he had compassion on them. He just had a love and a compassion for people, and he hated to see people suffer. And ultimately, he cared so deeply for us that he actually offered himself to redeem every last person of sin and death and put them into a relationship with God our Father. John chapter 2 and verse 11 tells us that the miracle of turning water into wine, that first one that he did of many, revealed his glory, and people believed that he was who he said he was. Who did he say he was? He said, "I'm the Messiah. I'm the Son of God." These miracles help people to say, "Yes, I believe." So this weekend, we're looking at John chapter 9, and we're going to look at all 41 verses. And Jesus says, and I think this is the key verse in the whole chapter, when he comes across this man born blind, he says this. The disciples ask, why is this man like this? And here's the statement he made. He said that the works of God might be displayed in him. So near the end of the book of John in chapter 20, it says there the reason that John wrote this book. He says Jesus performed many other signs. So we don't even have them all in the Bible. There are many more. In the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's why Jesus came and did all these miracles and wonders and signs for people. There were spiritual conversations. Now, there are many reasons why Jesus did miracles and signs and wonders, but I think in this passage, it's very interesting to see that it spawns a whole bunch of communication, a whole bunch of conversations. And I'm convinced that Jesus did this miracle that the word may begin to get out in the community. And I believe this took the community of Jerusalem by surprise. And there was lots of talk going on about who this Jesus is. Well, there are actually 7 spiritual conversations that happen in this passage. And I want to bring those into focus here this morning as we look at our role in spiritual conversations. What are some ways in that we're given in this video and in God's Word of getting into these spiritual conversations? Well, it's one of the values we have around here. And this year in particular, we are focused in on this value that we have of reaching our world. Well, if we never speak, it's going to be tough to reach our world. We need to be out there communicating, having spiritual conversations, and reach our world. That's the value. Let me talk about the vision that we have. It says we will share the message of Jesus Christ in word and deed throughout our community, planting churches as we go. We will go and partner with others who go around the world to take the gospel to those who have not heard. That's our 5th value. If you want to see all of our values, you can go to the Welcome Center out there in the foyer. They can give you a list of our 5 values. But this is the value that we're holding under the microscope and putting into focus this year. This idea of reaching our world. Now, I picked the book of John because it has so much dialogue and spiritual conversations in it. The book is known as the gospel that has the most speaking, narratives, storylines, conversations, and that's why we're studying it. Oh, may this book be stirring us to have conversations with others about Jesus. I don't know if it's made a difference in your life yet. But I want to tell you, it's made a difference in my life. And when I get up in the morning and I begin to say, God, what do you have for me today? Do you have a spiritual conversation for me? As I start my day that way with prayer, it's amazing what happens. Even this week, I had 2 conversations with people. One of them may be here this weekend. We need to be talking about Jesus. That's what he did, and if we call ourselves followers of Jesus, then we need to do what he did. And what did he do? He came here to bring his message. He opened his mouth. His whole life was about speaking with others about what he's done. We need to be doing the same. Now, I'm not talking here about awkward communication conversations or manipulative kind of conversations where we're really trying to bring them to Jesus with everything we got, and we're forcing the conversation. We're getting weird in the middle of it, and people begin to avoid us. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm convinced that there are many natural ways to feed in what it means to be a follower of Jesus and have these kinds of conversations. So hopefully this passage today will spur us on, will stir us up to have these kind of spiritual conversations. So your bulletin insert, if you don't have one, raise your hand. An usher will make sure you get one. There are just 7 talking points here. They don't all begin with the same letter. They're not all corresponding. They're just talking points as we go through these 41 different verses. I want to follow these spiritual conversations. So first of all, a great way into spiritual conversations is correcting with truth. Jesus did this. The disciples, it says in verse 2, his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Great question. Coming out of what they believed back there in that day, what the Pharisees taught. Verse 3, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So I don't know about you, but many times in my life, I've come into people having conversations. And so whether it's around the water cooler at work or whether it's someone that begins to talk to you about something about God or something about the church or something about the world, and all of a sudden there's a great opportunity for you to say, for me to say, "Hey, I don't know if I agree with you. I don't think the Bible supports that. No, you haven't been in church for a while. I can tell because my church is not like that." These are great moments to step in. And I have to tell you that there was a time, and there's been times in my life where I walked away from a situation and went, "Oh, that was such a great opportunity to say something," and I said nothing. You ever done that? I've done that. But I want to tell you now, I don't let those situations go by, and they are great ways of jumping in and helping people to see the other side of life. Now, I'm not talking about, these situations could be a well-meaning Christian. Maybe you've got a few of those in your workplace, and they do more damage than good, right? Seen those? They don't go to church that much, they don't know that much, but they're in there talking and giving a very unbalanced view. And so sometimes you need to correct those kinds of situations. Or maybe it's people mocking. Jump in on those situations. Now, I'm not talking about having conversations where you argue. Don't do that. Don't argue your point. If it turns into mockery or putting people down, dominating the conversation, back out of the conversation. Because there are many more conversations that this person's going to be. You don't want to muddy the water in these person's lives, and they go away saying, Christians, all they want to do is argue. All they want to do is dominate the conversation, force me into a place I don't want to be. Don't be that guy. But I want to tell you, there's ways to jump in. And there's ways to make an impact for God. And I say to a lot of people that struggle with relationships and struggle with being a good conversation person, get into a small group. In small group, if you're a dominator of conversations, you will soon be corrected by the group. If you're talking too much, you're cutting people off, you're too forceful, they'll let you know. That's why I love small groups, because it's a great place to learn to be a great conversationalist. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this point, of correcting with truth, because I preached the first 11 verses way back in January 14 and 15. So you can go and look at our website and you can see it there. But I really want us to learn this art and learn this skill. Many people say to me, the most common thing I hear when we talk about spiritual conversations, and I have these conversations after the service, many people say to me, I don't know enough. Well, you know what? You just counted yourself out. And that little excuse sometimes follows in people's lives, and they'll say that for 40 years. I'm going, come on. The spiritual life is about growth. It's about maturity. You need to grow up. You need to learn some stuff so that you have something good to say. That's our purpose here on this earth. Jesus said, would you represent me and represent me well? That's what we should be doing. Let's go to number 2. Number 2 would say that we need to be connecting with our neighbors. Verses 8 to 12, it says, his neighbors, those who had formerly seen him begging, asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? They know something about him. Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I am the man. How then were your eyes opened, they asked. And he replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. Where is this man? They asked him. I don't know, he said. I want to tell you something. If someone said to me, this man healed me, I'm going to go find him. And I think there were probably lots of people, just because of this conversation this man had with his neighbors, lots of people, I'm guessing, went out to find Jesus. Maybe they hobbled there because they needed to be healed. Maybe they couldn't see and they went to find him. All sorts of reasons. This conversation, I think, drove people back to Jesus. Now, let me ask you a tough question that I asked myself. How involved am I in my community, right where I live? How well do I know my neighbors? Or am I just like a lot of people who go home and we cocoon and we don't want to know anybody, we don't want to talk to anybody, we just want to cocoon and watch Netflix, and that's our life? Come on. I'm saying this to myself. Come on, Al. You can do better than that. You know, I was a couple of summers ago, we were neighbors, took a step over to us and invited us to their daughter's wedding. And I want to say that my wife and I, we probably could have come up with 100 excuses of why we didn't want to go. It's summertime, beautiful Saturday. This is our time together. We got to give that up. I got to go and preach right after that wedding. And then if I'm going to go to the reception, I got to go after the service is over on Saturday. I have to get dressed up, and you can look at me. I don't like wearing a suit. I don't like wearing a tie unless I have to. And what if someone should ask me to dance? I can't dance. It's an awful sight. It's an awful sight. And then what if the pastor faints and someone says, is there a pastor in the house? I'm on. Come on. But we went to the wedding. And wow, did that ever help our relationship with our neighbors? They saw us there. We joked back and forth. It was great. And I want to say to you that take those opportunities. Prioritize those things. Maybe it's a funeral of somebody that lives around you and you're there. Maybe it's a baby dedication. Maybe it's a baptism. But we need to grieve together, celebrate together, get to know our neighbors. I'm convinced that God has us planted in a particular place for a particular reason, and He wants us to share, have spiritual conversations with our neighbors. A couple of things that we've done. I've done this a few times. When new neighbors are moving in, the truck's pulled up to the door, we just get our boots on and we go across and we help them unload their stuff. I don't enjoy doing that. I do it because I want to get to know my neighbors. And I want to have an in their life, and it works great. Maybe if we missed the move, we can still take a cake, take a meal over for them. These are some of the things we've done. It was a few summers ago that I saw an ambulance in my neighbor's yard. And so immediately, I didn't even think about it. I just went across. There was lights flashing and people all over the place. but I wormed my way in there. What's going on? What's happening? And I got up to my neighbor. Here he is on the stretcher. He saw my face, and he thanked me I don't know how many times. He said, when I went to the hospital, I was just surprised that you'd come over to my place and see me at an awful time in my life. Paid great dividends. I could have easily said, well, there's so much activity there. I don't think I should get involved. I think I should stay over here. No. We need to be involved in our neighbor's life, because it may be a day when something happens and our neighbors are coming to us and say, help me, I need help, or did this really happen in your life? We want to have that depth of relationship so that we have something to say at a moment when they may need to know about Jesus. The third one I've got here is this is going to take you to pressure situations. You're going to be under pressure in these times. Verse 13 says, They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. So we may not get this, but Jesus did a lot of healing on the Sabbath. And I think it was to spur more conversations among those who held beliefs that were not right. See, these Pharisees would say, you shouldn't be healing, you shouldn't be doing some of these things on the Sabbath. And they'd gone way too far, way more than God's word had said to them. And so Jesus used these occasions to heal people. Well, he's in trouble. And verse 13 says, they brought him to the Pharisees. This man has been involved in a misdemeanor. He's done something wrong here. It's hard to believe, I know. But it's like you're going to the principal's office. You're in trouble. We're taking you to the police station. That would be similar to what this was like. Now, I remember talking about pressure. I remember when I was in grade 11, I remember it really well. I had made a commitment to follow Jesus. I lived like hell before that. But I made a commitment to follow Jesus in grade 11. And a bunch of us, I hadn't cleaned up completely because a bunch of us got kicked out of chemistry. I believe it was 11, chemistry 20. We got kicked out and we had to go sit in a room after we talked to the principal. And so I was with all these bullies and mockers. And so as I sat there, one of the guys said to me, hey, you know what, guys? Al's got religious on us. And I felt the blood rush out of my face, and I felt my head start to spin, and I thought, oh boy, I'm in front of all these people. They're all looking at me. They're looking for something to mock right now, and it's going to be me. And so I thought to myself, I'm not hiding under the table. I said, yes, I have become a follower of Jesus. And then another guy says, oh, that means you got to go to church every weekend. That means you got to give money to the church, right? I hear they give like half their money to the church or something crazy like that. And they went on to say, no more partying? Come on. And I gave him an answer. I said, no, this isn't about do's and don'ts. This is primarily about a relationship with Jesus. And then the thing kind of turned sideways, and they had some time poking fun at me. And that's some pressure that I've had to endure just to have these spiritual conversations. Now I just say, bring it on. Mock me, do whatever you want to do, because I want to get this word across to you. Jesus knew these situations would come. And I don't think he was looking for us to hide under tables and run to the hills and say nothing or deny. That's not what he was calling us to do. Listen to Matthew chapter 5, 11 to 16. Jesus' words, he said, Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice, be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before me. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything. And sometimes I think, has Jesus stopped knocking at my door to have conversations with people because I've lost my saltiness? I'm just not the person he wants to send into a situation where somebody wants to talk about Jesus. And then he goes on to say, not good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Wow, I don't want to be that guy. Listen to verse 14. It says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in a house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." And then there's Matthew 10:32. Says, "Whoever acknowledges me," this is Jesus speaking, "I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven." So let me tell you, as a follower of Jesus, you're going to be in situations that are filled with pressure. People are going to mock you. People are going to question you. They're going to have some tough things to say to you. We need to get some courage in the midst of fear, and that's my next point. I want to take you to verse 18. It says, "They did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. 'Is this your son?' they asked. 'Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?' 'We know he is our son,' the parents answered. 'We know that he was born blind, but how he can see or who opened his eyes, we don't know.'" Come on. Yeah, you do. "Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid. They were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That is why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." They basically chickened out. Now, being put out of the synagogue was a big deal. It wasn't like being escorted out of a restaurant because you're too rowdy. It wasn't like you're going to, you need to leave now because you're not welcome here. No, that wasn't it at all. Basically, you were excommunicated from the synagogue. You were cursed. You were cut off from the religious and social life of the community. So it put you in a very bad place. So standing up may have caused these parents a real tough, could have been really tough on them in their community. But we can't let fear win the day. Dave Hearn, he's president of the Christian Missionary Alliance, oversees 460 churches. He writes this in his latest blog concerning fear and spiritual conversations. He said, "A few months ago, I passed by a man leaning against his car outside of a convenience store. He was large and very intimidating. His face was gruff, and he had huge muscular arms all covered with fierce tattoos. I picked up my pace in order to avoid making eye contact. At that moment, I felt the Spirit of God speak to my soul with a very strong, 'Open your eyes and look,' is what the Spirit said. After an internal struggle, I turned around and I walked up to the man and I said, I think God wants me to pray for you." He looked stunned, and then his eyes teared up and he said, "I have been addicted to hard drugs for most of my life. I am on my way to a drug rehab program. This is my third attempt, and I feel hopeless. And I can't believe that God still cares." Says Dave writes, "I put my hand on his shoulder and I prayed for God's grace, courage, and healing to be poured out on him. We embraced in an awkward but deeply heartfelt hug, and I continued on my way. With each step, I felt strangely full in my soul. It was like God was saying, 'I spy someone precious to me who is in deep pain. Do you see him?' Well, my eyes were opened and I saw that I would normally have never seen. As you enter a new year, perhaps the most significant prayer you can pray is, 'Lord, would you open my eyes?'" Do you know that Jesus' most common command for us is, "Fear not"? He doesn't want us living in fear. In fact, you know who the author of fear is? It's the devil. If you've ever brushed up against him, you felt this fear. He deals in fear. I don't think God ever intended us to live in fear. Don't let it rule you. Be courageous for Jesus. Don't let fear win the day. Let's look at number 5. Number 5 is along the same line. Just stand firm. Now, this man was brought before the religious leaders for a second time. But as you saw in the video, and you read in the Bible, he was undaunted this time. He didn't change his story to please them. He's been living with eyes that see, which would have been awesome, and he's not willing to give that up at all. Verse 27, he says, I have told you already, he says to the Pharisees, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? He wasn't backing off. He didn't care if they threw him out of the synagogue and ostracized him and even cursed him. Didn't care. And I wonder sometimes if we care too much and we don't stand firm because we're afraid of being ostracized, we're afraid of being thrown out or fired or getting a failing grade because we don't want to stand up for the truth. 6th conversation is an awesome one, 35 to 39. And this is Jesus going to find the man. And Jesus is probably wondering, how is this guy doing? And he says to him, Lord, he says to him, do you know who healed you? And in verse 38, this man comes to know Jesus when he says, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Jesus led him to himself. 7th one, be okay with rejection. And it's a conversation that Jesus had with the Pharisees, and they basically said, we don't care what you say. We're rejecting all of this. Last point I want to make is when people come to faith in Jesus, it's a journey, and we see that in this passage. And if you could look back on your life, you would know that it's a journey. Before I gave my life to Jesus in grade 11, I'd been through a lot of journey looking at the things of Jesus. People had talked to me. I'd been through lots of conversations. So you need to understand that you may be having the first conversation with someone, or the 6th, or the 10th, or the 50th. On their journey to Jesus. Now we see a great journey here. Verse 11, the man was asked, who was it that healed you? He says, I don't know. But there's something significant going on in my life because now I'm seeing. Listen to verse 17, a little bit later, before the Pharisees. This man said, Jesus is a prophet. He's had time to think about his experience with Jesus. Verse 32 and 33, he says, Jesus is from God, he told the Pharisees. You should know this. You should know where he comes from because he's doing all sorts of significant things. And then in verse 38, he actually came to faith in Jesus. He worshiped Jesus. So like I said before, we need to be out there having spiritual conversations. We don't need to be pushing people, picking fruit, manipulating people to get them to know Jesus. I know that that's often how the 70s were in the church. But I think we just need to see their journey, their life as a journey towards Jesus. So let's not pick the fruit before it's ripe. Let's follow the lead of the Spirit.